What up? It's your boy T-Bone. A reaction. Today is the first Wrestling Day reactions, or Wrestling Wednesday, or Wrestling Day reactions, depends on what I get out there, of 2026. A good amount of these going to be looking at stuff that happened in 2025 as well too, including remembering those we lost in 2025. So that being said, we're going to kick things off from Wrestling Andy and looking at 2020, look back at 2025 of WWE. So recently, WWE had a roller coaster year this past year as well too. Hopefully things might get a little better. Although folks have been a little hopping on this recent Raw episode. Despite the up and down roller coaster, there have been some great best moments in WWE in 2025. Whether it's best moments by the baby faces or some best moments by the heels. Either way, regardless, there was some good. We're gonna take a look at those good moments of WWE as well too, with the best of 2025 moments of the year of the wrestling or WWE mainly as well too, or it might be just wrestling in general. Either way as well too, though, we'll take a look back at the good times of wrestling in 2025, whether it's from baby faces or the heels, or fortunately the heels. So without further ado, let's check it out.
In a prior video, we talked about some of wrestling's worst moments in
Alright, so they did the worst moment first one, still the best moments first.
2025. But as Star Wars has taught us all, the dark side exists along with the light side. So that means there must have been plenty of good things to come out of this year too then, right? Well, yes there was, and it's those things we're going to be looking at right now, starting with the ascension of Gunther. Now, even prior to 2024, Gunther was already someone who was on the rise in WWE, as with Triple H booking him, he'd spent his first couple of years on the main roster becoming not only a two-time World Heavyweight Champion, but also the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time at 666 days. But as it turned out, this was nothing compared to what was to come for the Austrian, as it would be during the current 12-month period that he reached another level altogether. How did he do this? Well, after hitting a roadblock of sorts at WrestleMania 41 when he tapped out to Jey Uso, the train would very much get back on the tracks in July, as this is the point Gunther would formally retire Goldberg. Yes, in what was being marketed as Goldberg's last match, it would be the former NXT United Kingdom champion who faced off against him here. And not just faced off against him, but toppled him with relative ease, because once all was said and done that night, the Vienna native would be standing tall as he got to add the moniker of Legend Killer to his already impressive list of accolades. Where would he go from here? Well, after retiring one legend, the man formerly known as Walter simply went on to do the same thing again when, at Saturday night's main event on December 13th, he stood on the opposite side of the ring from John Cena during his retirement match. And like with Goldberg, Big Match John would fall here, meaning Gunther got to say he'd retired two bona fide legends over the space of one calendar year. Of course, it wasn't just that he retired Cena here though. No, it was that he tapped him out. That's right, in a highly controversial move, in his final moments the champ would do what he always said he'd never do, he gave up. And that all served to make his opponent that night feel like the biggest monster in all of wrestling. As you would expect then, Gunther is one of the hottest things in the entire industry as of the time of this video's recording, with it looking like 2026 is going to be another banner year for him as he presumably serves as the final boss of the Raw brand. But while this was something of a sad ending for John Cena, at least he did get to have a great moment himself in 2025 when he turned babyface during the lead up to SummerSlam. Now, the idea that John Cena would have to turn babyface would have been wild prior to this year, as up until then, for all of his time on top of WWE, Mr. Hustle, Loyalty, and Respect had been the perennial hero of WWE, the closest thing there was to a modern-day Ricky Steamboat. But all that changed at Elimination Chamber in March, as this was the point where, in an attempt to create a viral moment which would get fans interested, Triple H booked Cena to turn to the dark side. What followed on from here? Well, rather than fans getting another generational run from the champ as the mythical heel turn finally occurred, what happened instead was a botch on the level of the Invasion back in 2001, as the whole thing never got out of first gear. Needless to say then, this was hugely disappointing, and after a while it led to audiences begging for John to turn babyface once more so that they could cheer him during his final few months as an active wrestler. Would this happen? Yes, it would. And while the actual turn itself would be somewhat underwhelming, with it happening randomly on the SmackDown before SummerSlam with no real storyline reason, at least it now meant that, for what remained of his run, the champ would get to return to the side of the good guys. So because of that, during his last string of bouts against Cody Rhodes, Logan Paul, AJ Styles, Brock Lesnar, Dominic Mysterio, and of course Gunther, it would be the old John Cena who was present.
Yep.
And this made the farewell feel a little bit better than it would have done if he'd still been trying to play the bad guy as he did during the majority of the first half of the year. Really, the lesson to be learned here was that, while fans might have wanted to boo the West Newbury native for a long time, they didn't want to do this during his last year as a wrestler.
Exactly.
No, by that point, he was a departing legend, so all they wanted to see him do was play the hits one more time before he rode off into the sunset forever. Yes, this truly was the best way for things to go. So we're glad the babyface turn happened, as it allowed the whole heel run to be somewhat redeemed.
Thank God.
The only question left at this point is, have we truly seen the last of John Cena, or will he find his way back into the ring again at some point down the line? We guess that remains to be seen, but if he ever did come out of retirement, he wouldn't be the first person to do this, as this same situation was what gave us our next great moment of 2025 in wrestling, the return of AJ Lee. Okay, let's give a bit of a backstory for this one for those who don't remember. Back in the early to mid-2010s, the WWE Women's Division was in pretty dire straits, with the whole thing pretty much being held together by two women, AJ Lee and Paige. But come 2015, after the bitter situation which had been her husband CM Punk's initial exit from WWE, combined with a nagging neck injury, made things all too difficult for her to go to work anymore, AJ decided to call it a day and retire. And that was the way it looked like things were going to remain forever for a while, because even when Punk returned to wrestling in 2021 to initially perform for AEW, his wife would be nowhere to be seen. Why was this? Well, she seemed pretty content by then to have a new life as an author and mental health advocate. But then something changed, as it was in the lead up to WrestlePalooza in the autumn of 2025 that hints began being dropped on screen that Lee was about to make a return to the ring after all these years. And those hints would all lead to the moment where, on the September 5th episode of SmackDown, the strains of her old music hit once more as she skipped down the aisle, looking like she hadn't aged a day during the intervening years. That's right, AJ Lee was now back in the fold, and her first order of business would be to team up with CM Punk at WrestlePalooza to take on and defeat Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch in a mixed tag match. As you would expect then, this was a major moment for fans of hers, as they'd always held out hope she'd one day come back, especially after her husband did so in 2021. So to see it actually happen then was quite a scene to witness. Where would AJ go from here now that her career had been restarted? Well, while she wouldn't be appearing every week, she would continue to make appearances here and there throughout 2025, with the most notable of these probably being her involvement in the Women's War Games bout at Survivor Series on November 29th, where she once again beat Becky Lynch, presumably setting up a singles match between the two somewhere down the line. And this isn't the only big moment the WWE Women's Division had going for them in 2025, as our next entry also served as a major positive for it. What are we talking about here? Why, the heel turn of Naomi, of course. That's right. While Naomi had long since been a player in the WWE Women's Division as far back as the 2010s, with her even winning world titles prior to 2025, it was during this year that she fully ascended to the next level and became one of the better things in the division. How did she do this? Well, it was here that she turned heel and in the process managed to completely reinvent her character. And what changed as a result of this heel turn then? That's easy. Now, no longer feeling the glow, Naomi would demand all of her opponents proceed with caution instead, as from this point onwards, she set her sights on destroying anyone in her path by absolutely any means necessary. And that proved to be a great strategy for the Florida native because, come the summer months, she'd be using her newfound momentum as a big bad of the women's division to win the Women's Money in the Bank contract at the titular pay-per-view. And not long after this, she'd be cashing in said contract to win the Women's World Championship from Io Sky. Sure, things would hit a bit of a roadblock here, as pretty quickly after winning the big one, Naomi would be forced to vacate. Does this mean we won't be seeing the former Funkadactyl inside of a WWE ring anytime in the near future? Unfortunately, it does. But it also means that when she finally comes back, she'll have a ready-made story to go after the gold she never lost. Really, if you wanted to call this the best run Naomi has had to date, we wouldn't argue with you, as this would be a hard statement to refute. The only thing we could see overtaking it, in fact, would be her inevitable return from pregnancy, hopefully at some point in 2026. Of course, while both Naomi and AJ Lee's stories represent great individual moments for the WWE Women's Division in 2025, there was another more overarching moment which was just as strong. And that moment would be our next entry as it happens, the return of the Evolution PLE.
Yep.
Yes, after the initial women's-only WWE show Evolution aired in 2018, there had been plenty of calls for it to become an annual show. But for one reason or another, this was not what happened. No, what happened instead was that the whole concept would go dark for the better part of the next decade, so long in fact that many fans began to wonder if it was ever going to return at all. But then in 2025, finally the show made its triumphant return when, in the summer of this year, WWE announced Evolution 2 would be getting held on July 13th. What did this mean for WWE fans? Well, it meant they got to see the ladies do their own thing on their own show, with this giving them the spotlight for the entire evening and stopping them from being overshadowed by both the retirement of Goldberg and All In the night prior. And that was something the female roster took full advantage of here, as this was a show which saw matches such as Becky Lynch, Bayley, and Lyra Valkyria all going to war over the Women's Intercontinental title, Jacy Jayne and Jordynne Grace fighting it out over the NXT Women's Championship, and 4 teams enter the fray when the women's tag team titles were put on the line. Then, as if this wasn't enough, both women's world titles would be on the line when Tiffany Stratton defended against Trish Stratus and Io Sky defended against Rhea Ripley. Of course, it would be neither of these two latter women leaving the evening as Women's World Heavyweight Champion, however. No, in a big shocker designed to end the show with a bang, Naomi would cash in her Money in the Bank contract here in order to start her own reign on top. Obviously then, all of this left the fans who had been watching satisfied, as all in all, Evolution turned out to be one of the better WWE shows of the year, easily the best WWE show of that weekend. But it might not have been the best show of that weekend overall because, as we
Hold on a second. I'm back. Let's keep going.
Previously mentioned, this was the weekend where AEW held All In, an event which served as the climax of our next entry for the Best of Wrestling in 2025, the redemption story of Hangman Page. Now, over time, if one thing has become clear about AEW, it's that Hangman Page is the main character of the promotion, and that the story of All Elite Wrestling is very much the story of him. And we say that because everything which has gone on with it during its 6-year existence has been mirrored in the journey of the Cowboy. That early rise in popularity for Tony Khan's promotion, this was happening at the same point Page was also reaching the mountaintop for the first time. And their dip in popularity during 2023 and 2024, well, that also coincided with the Virginia native suffering a crisis of confidence. So bad a crisis of confidence would he suffer here, in fact, it would be during his excellent feud with Swerve Strickland in late 2023 and pretty much all of 2024 that the Hangman would end up turning heel, as he basically started doing a whole Bret Hart in 1997 character, someone who was completely justified in his villainous actions. What this meant, though, was that All Elite Wrestling...
Hey, people say that I hate the term justifiable villain. I just hate that term because there's no excuse to be a villain.
No longer had a hero as their primary character, and this allowed acts like Jon Moxley and the Death Riders to rise up and take over as they took the men's world title hostage for the better part of the year. But then in early 2025, something happened. Fans started to get behind Adam Page again as those familiar strains of his not safe for work chant could be heard echoing around arenas. And all this led to a situation where, right as AEW was starting to find itself once more, the Hangman was also rediscovering who he'd been when he was at his best. Just as well he did this then because, after beating Will Ospreay at Double or Nothing to win the men's leg of the Owen Hart Cup, the former Bullet Club member suddenly became AEW's last hope to get the belt off of Mox. Would he do this? Yes. And it all happened at All In Texas, where in front of 25,000 rabid fans, the Cowboy would best Moxley during an absolute brutal Texas death match, so for that reason alone, it can't be seen as anything less than one of the best wrestling moments of 2025. But let's move away from on-screen stuff for now, and over to the off-screen for a while instead, as there have been plenty of big business moves which shook things up this year too, one of which would be our next entry, the WWE acquisition of AAA. Okay, this one's going to require a bit of context. So before we go any further, let's go back to 1992. That was the year when, after branching off of CMLL, the oldest wrestling promotion in the world, AAA would establish themselves as a second major league down in Mexico, one which looked to move away from traditional lucha libre and instead towards a more modern American style of product. But while this would see the fledgling company find a lot of success for a while, particularly during the 90s, come the 2010s it would be fair to say that they were a very distant number 2 behind their chief competitors, with this being less of a WWF and WCW in 1998 situation and more of a WWF and WCW in 2000 type of one. So bad had things gotten, in fact, AAA was in constant financial dire straits as the 2020s began, with their owners always being on the lookout for people to sell to. And these buyers would eventually come in early 2025, as it was then that TKO, the parent company of WWE, decided that in looking to further expand their footprint around the world and become the main player in wrestling for each country, they wanted to purchase the Lucha promotion outright. What did this mean for AAA going forward? It meant that now, with the power of the WWE machine behind them again, AAA was theoretically going to be able to compete with CMLL again south of the border. Has this worked? Well, it's still early days, but if the TKO era AAA shows so far are anything to go by, they're certainly putting their best foot forward with this.
They are.
After all, now it's not uncommon to see big names like a Rey Mysterio, Dominic Mysterio, or the Judgment Day appearing at the promotion's events. And this has helped to boost ticket sales a lot. Honestly, more than anything else, what the WWE purchase of AAA has represented has been a whole second chance at life for the Lucha company, one which, if things continue on the way they're going, might even see them eventually return to being the powerhouse they were during the 90s. And they're not the only company who have benefited from a TKO relationship during 2025.
Oh, yep.
No, if we move our eyes back
yes.
north,
yes.
up to the Great White North of Canada, we'll find a very similar situation
This
playing
crossover
itself
been
out
so
in the relationship
great.
between
I'm
WWE
glad it's still going,
and
too.
TNA. Now, it should be noted here that there are some slight differences with these two situations, primarily in the fact that, unlike AAA, WWE don't actually own TNA today in 2025.
No.
But even if they don't technically own them, they've pretty much invited the Toronto-based territory into their ecosystem at this point, to the level where many now consider the operation started by the Jarretts all the way back during the early 2000s to be a fourth brand of WWE alongside Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. How did things get to this point, especially after years of Vince McMahon refusing to acknowledge another company even existed in North American wrestling? Well, it began a few years ago with Mickie James appearing in the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble while still Knockouts World Champion, but really got cooking in 2025. And the reason we say it really got cooking in 2025 is because this was the point that the NXT TNA partnership went into overdrive, with the two brands now becoming closely linked together. So closely tied, in fact, many NXT stars like Trick Williams, Jacy Jayne, and Kalani Jordan would go on to win TNA titles, all while stars from up north such as Joe Hendry and Jordan Grace were becoming regular weekly fixtures on 2.0. Really, there was a closer bond here between NXT and TNA than there was between NXT and either Raw or SmackDown. Obviously, though, the real question was what would this do to benefit Carlos Silva's brand in the long term? And the answer to that question would come in the winter of 2025. What happened here? Well, after many months of speculating, it would be announced that Impact was returning to basic cable for the first time in over a decade as their new TV deal, a deal which starts in January
Yeah, I can't wait for that deal starting, because it starts in the 15th.
2026, would see them appear on the AMC network, all while getting a reported $10 million per year for the honor. And this means their visibility will now be a lot higher compared to where it was on their prior home of Axis, theoretically suggesting their overall viewership should be about to go up. Seriously, to go from being at death's door throughout pretty much all of the late 2010s to having a seat at the table once more is quite an achievement.
It is.
And it likely never would have happened.
I remember they was like chair hopping like crazy to now everybody access to Access TV, and then the best thing they did for a good minute was have a stream on Twitch. That was a good one. And then they had a stream on YouTube for a good minute too. So yeah. So this is definitely good.
Had WWE not partnered up with them here and, by most accounts, used the power of the TKO machine during contract negotiations with different networks. Well, let's move away from TNA for now and back over to WWE again. As it's there, we find our next high point in 2025 in wrestling, the United States title open challenge given to us by Sami Zayn. That's right, while fans of WWE might associate the United States title open challenge more with John Cena back in 2015, there was another version of this which carried out 10 years later in 2025. The only difference is it wasn't Big Match John who was helming it here, rather it was Sami Zayn instead. Why did Sami Zayn choose to bring back the old concept during the mid-2020s? Well, after winning the United States strap from Solo Sikoa in August, he wanted to honor what Cena had done years prior on account of the fact that this was right in the middle of his retirement run. So it was then that for the next couple of months, SmackDown got a guaranteed highlight every week, as whenever the former honorary Uce came out to the ring, you knew you were about to see a banger.
Exactly.
And that was true no matter who answered this challenge, be that Rey Fenix, Aleister Black, Shinsuke Nakamura, or even Big Match John himself. But it wasn't all about just giving opportunities to more established acts.
Of course not.
No, again, like with what Cena had been doing back in 2015, Sami Zayn used his open challenge as an opportunity to highlight younger, more up-and-coming talent, which is exactly how we got a situation where both Carmelo Hayes and Javon Evans also came perilously close to winning the gold. In the end, though, it would be neither of those men who beat the Canadian. No, that honor would go to Ilya Dragunov, as it would be on the October 17th episode of the Blue Brand that he toppled the champ. And from there on in, he'd go on a great run of his own as the top dog of the SmackDown mid-card, with this proving that what Zayn had set out to do in the first place in further building up the division had ultimately been a success. So successful was it, in fact, not only did it leave the United States title in a better place than it found it, it also helped to elevate Sami once more, to the point that as 2026 approaches, there are fresh calls for him to get his long-awaited world title run.
Hope so.
Will this happen?
And also later on, we got Melo Hayes that won it from Ilya. So,
Guess we'll just have to wait and see. But if it does, we might first have to see an end to the feud which has in many ways defined the World Heavyweight title over on Raw this year, our next entry for Wrestling's Best of 2025, the program between Seth Rollins and CM Punk.
Yes.
Now, the feud between Seth Rollins and CM Punk has obviously stretched on longer than just 2025. Hell, ever since the Second City Saint first reappeared in WWE back in late 2023, the two have been at each other's throats, both on screen and allegedly in real life. And if we want to go back even further than that, we can find the bad blood between the two parties beginning during the early to mid-2010s when Punk first came across the Architect on the main roster, and there started a situation where the two would quickly grow to not like one another. What makes 2025 so different when it comes to the eternal beef between these two men? Well, it was in 2025 that things went to another level again, because it would be in the main event of WrestleMania 41 Night 1 that Seth managed to get Punk's longtime confidant Paul Heyman to abandon the Chicago native and throw his lot in with the Vision instead. And this infuriated the former WWE champion so much he'd spend the entirety of the summer seeking revenge on Rollins. Where would that lead the pair? Well, not long after the heels in this scenario won the men's Money in the Bank ladder match in June, he'd feign injury for a while in order to lure Punk into a false sense of security. And this would lead to SummerSlam, where, mere moments after Mr. AJ Lee beat Gunther to win the World Heavyweight title, his rival would cash in on him and take the gold away for his own. What happened after that? Well, after that, both men's wives, AJ and Becky Lynch, would get involved as a mixed tag team bout took place at WrestlePalooza, with the Brookses ultimately coming out the winners here. So obviously then, everything seemed set for one final showdown where Punk would finally beat Rollins one-on-one to get his world title back. But in the end, that's not what happened, because after Seth suffered another, this time legitimate, injury, he'd be forced to vacate the gold. And that left his chief rival to win the now vacant strap at Saturday night's main event on November 1st instead. Of course, this does leave some lingering unfinished business between the pair, however, business which likely now won't get resolved until 2026. That said, even if it doesn't get resolved until then, 2025 will remain a strong year for the continued Seth Rollins-CM Punk feud regardless, as when it was active, it helped to keep WWE strong in the face of other botched angles like the John Cena heel turn. So for that reason, it has to be considered one of the best things about 2025 in wrestling. Are there other moments we've missed out here today? Sure, we can never get to them all in one video,
of course
but
not.
This represents a nice cross-section of what made the 12-month period so great regardless, and gives us hope that if all goes well, 2026 might be an even stronger year. As with WWE still being strong, AEW finding a renewed sense of momentum, and even TNA being in a better place than they've been in a long time, the industry as a whole continues to thrive.
There you go, and there you have it though. The best of 2025. Next week, we'll take a look at what was the downside of 2025 as well, too. Possibly. Other than that, if you like my reaction, like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's your boy T-Bird signing off. One love.